In 2025, scientists put people inside fMRI scanners and showed them blank screens. Nothing. Just noise. And some of those people, on screens where literally nothing was projected, reported seeing something. Not because they were hallucinating, because they were imagining too vividly. And their brains could not tell the difference. Here's what that means. Your brain doesn't have two separate channels. One for reality, one for imagination. They share the same hardware, the exact same circuits. The difference between seeing and imagining isn't where the signal goes, it's how loud it is. And sometimes, that difference disappears completely. Marcia Johnson was a freshman in college when she told her friends a story, a memory from her early childhood. Vivid, detailed, completely real to her. Her family's car had gotten a flat tire on a road trip during a California drought. In her memory, the children climbed out of the car. They found a way to get water. She remembered the heat of the road, the relief of finding something to drink. She told the story with total confidence. Her parents heard her and gently said, "The children never left the car." Her father had walked ahead for help. Everyone else waited in the heat. No one found water. That part, the part she remembered so clearly, had never happened. What Marcia had done as a young child was imagine a solution, an act so vivid, so emotionally real, that her brain had stored it as a memory. The origin tag, "this was imagined," had simply been lost. That moment stayed with her. It became the driving question of her career. In 1981, Marcia Johnson, now a professor at Princeton, published a paper that would quietly found an entire field. It was called reality monitoring. The idea was deceptively simple. Every memory has a source. Did this come from outside me? Something I perceived? Or did I generate it? Through imagination, reasoning, daydream. Johnson's claim. We don't store a label that says this was real. We infer the source afterward, based on what the memory feels like. Memories from real experiences tend to have richer perceptual detail. Color, texture, sound, the smell of a room, the specific quality of light. Memories from imagination tend to have more cognitive fingerprints, more awareness of the process of thinking. Reality monitoring, then, is not a lookup. It is a reconstruction. Every time we reach into memory, we are not retrieving a file. We're rebuilding the story of where it came from. And sometimes the rebuild is wrong. Her 1981 paper planted a question that would take 44 more years to fully answer. Where exactly in the brain is the line between real and imagined drawn? And what happens when it breaks? In 2000, researchers at MIT put people in fMRI scanners. They showed them faces, famous ones, and then asked them to simply imagine those faces with eyes closed. The results were unsettling. When people saw a famous face, a region called the fusiform face area activated, bright orange on the scan. When they imagined the same face, the fusiform face area activated again. Same region, same location, same spatial pattern, just slightly dimmer. The paper's conclusion: we use some of the same brain machinery when we actively see and when we simply imagine. Think about what that means. Imagination is not separate from perception. It runs through the same hardware, the same visual cortex that processes light from your retinas, also runs your daydreams. The same auditory processing regions that hear voices also generate the voice in your head when you read. The brain, in this sense, is deeply economical. But that economy has a cost. If imagination uses the same circuits as perception, what stops you from constantly confusing the two? Here's the part that nobody expected. It's not a quality difference. It's not even a location difference. It's a threshold. Your brain generates a single combined signal, called the reality signal, from both perception inputs and imagination inputs. A structure called the fusiform gyrus produces it, and the structure called the anterior insula, deep in the prefrontal cortex, watches that signal and evaluates it against a threshold. Signal crosses the threshold. Real. Signal stays below. Imagined. Under normal conditions, real perception drives a strong signal. Imagination drives a weaker one. The threshold holds. But what if imagination gets very vivid? What if the signal rises high enough to cross? In 2025, a team at University College London put this to the test. The UCL team gave 26 people a simple task. They showed them faint, noisy screens. Some had a barely visible pattern of diagonal stripes. Some had nothing, just noise. At the same time, participants were told to vividly imagine the same diagonal pattern. Then the question, was the pattern actually there? Or did you imagine it? The results, published in the journal Neuron in June 2025, were extraordinary. When participants imagined very vividly, when their imagination signal was particularly strong, they reported seeing the pattern on trials where nothing was there. Not on every trial, but measurably, reliably. The more vividly someone imagined, the more likely they were to report perceiving. Their fusiform gyrus, the reality signal generator, was crossing the threshold. The team's lead researcher, Nadine Dijkstra, described it simply. Imagine an apple in your mind's eye as vividly as you can. During imagination, many of the same brain regions activate in the same manner as when you see a real apple. Until recently, it remained unclear how the brain distinguishes between these real and imagined experiences. And now it was clear it doesn't always. The system can be overwhelmed. The threshold can be crossed. And then the question becomes, who is most at risk of crossing it? In 2015, researchers at Cambridge found something remarkable. Deep in the medial prefrontal cortex, the region that feeds into the reality threshold circuit, there is a fold of brain tissue called the paracingulate sulcus. It is one of the last brain structures to form before birth. Because it forms so late in fetal development, it varies enormously between people. In up to 27% of healthy individuals, this fold is almost entirely absent. And the researchers found something striking. Every 1 centimeter reduction in the length of this fold increased the likelihood of experiencing hallucinations by 19.9%. Not just in people with schizophrenia, in healthy volunteers too. The architecture of your reality monitoring system, the calibration of your threshold, was partly set before you took your first breath. This isn't a clean binary. You and someone who hears voices don't have different systems. You have the same system, at different settings. In 1760, a Swiss naturalist named Charles Bonnet visited his grandfather. His grandfather had gone nearly blind, but he was seeing things, not distressing things. Strange, vivid, beautiful things. Intricate tapestries, birds, flowers, and elaborate patterns, small figures in costume walking across the walls of his room. He knew they weren't real. He could reach his hand through them. They were silent. He simply couldn't stop seeing them. Today, up to 50% of people with significant vision loss experience what we now call Charles Bonnet Syndrome. As external visual input cuts off, the visual cortex, starved of real signals, begins generating its own, spontaneously, freely. The reality threshold has no incoming signal to compare against. The imagination channel runs unchecked. In schizophrenia, the mechanism is different but related. Voices arise, likely from misattributed inner speech. Thoughts the brain generates itself, but fails to tag as self-generated. They arrive labeled external. They sound like voices from outside. Dijkstra's 2025 paper put it directly. Schizophrenia has been associated with abnormalities in the prefrontal cortex and anterior insula, which suggests hallucinations in schizophrenia may be due to issues with reality threshold setting, not a broken generator producing false content. A miscalibrated judge. In 2025, researchers at MIT Media Lab showed something that should worry everyone. They gave participants AI-generated videos of real events. Realistic, indistinguishable from genuine footage. 2 weeks later, they tested memory of the original events. Participants who had watched the AI videos were twice as likely to have formed false memories. Memories that matched the synthetic video, not what actually happened. The mechanism, the AI video, is vivid, high resolution, emotionally engaging. It drives a strong signal through the same visual processing circuits. It crosses the threshold. It gets stamped real. And then it overwrites. This is not a hypothetical future problem. This is the same Pleistocene-era threshold circuit, calibrated for a world where vivid signals reliably indicated real experience. Now, being exploited by tools its architecture was never designed to handle. Elizabeth Loftus, who spent decades showing how easily memory can be rewritten, said it plainly. False memories feel exactly like real ones. The brain doesn't mark its own errors. And now, we are generating synthetic experiences at scale. Think about the memory you trust most. Something from childhood. Vivid, detailed. Something you've told other people, confidently, because you were there. Marcia Johnson was there, too. She was in the car. She felt the heat. She imagined getting water. The memory she trusted completely was an imagination she had forgotten imagining. This isn't a failure of her mind. It is the price of what her mind can do. The same mechanism that generated that false memory also generates every plan you've ever made, every scenario you've ever rehearsed, every future you've imagined for yourself. The capacity for confusion is the cost of the capacity to dream, and understanding where the threshold lives. That might be the most useful thing to know about the mind you're living inside. If this story shifted something, subscribe to ScienceLore. The next story might shift something too. Now here's a strange question. If your brain can be convinced that imagination is real, what happens when you give it a fake treatment and tell it the treatment will work? In the 1980s, doctors at Harvard were running a clinical trial. They gave patients in serious pain a sugar pill and told them it was morphine. The patient's pain reduced. Not because of the pill, because the brain, expecting relief, manufactured its own. Then the researchers ran a second test. They gave patients real morphine, but didn't tell them, secretly. The pain didn't reduce as much. The same drug. Half the effect. Because the brain's expectation wasn't there to amplify it. Your body contains a pharmaceutical factory, and it's been waiting for the right signal to open. Your brain can't tell imagination from reality. Here's why. 2. The reality signal, how your brain decides what's real. 3. Why vivid imagination can fool your own brain. 4. The threshold between real and imagined, and how it breaks. 5. You share the same brain architecture as hallucination. Science explains